All right. Thank you everyone for joining us. We would like to record this webinar as we're going to share it with individuals who expressed that they wanted to attend, but maybe were not able to join us today. So we just want to make sure that we have everyone's permission to record. So thank you for that. And we'd like to formally start our hour here together. Welcome to Connect and Access. We're thrilled that you are here joining us in this collaborative space where we are specifically designing it for educators and our state system of support partners from across the state to connect and be able to access their resources. So it's a monthly gathering where we're just fostering those connections, putting a name to a face, sharing amazing resources, and really offering that mutual support as we work towards improving student outcomes for all. And so in this space, we are going to have an opportunity to exchange ideas, seek advice, and really learn from the expertise of our colleagues here today. So today we're excited to welcome our guest from SIP, Supporting Inclusive Practices. And their mission is to offer statewide technical assistance to educational communities in the effort to develop inclusive and equitable systems. So really thank you for being here today. And we're going to make the most of our time together. So my name is Lori Balsano Wright, and I serve as the coordinator with Open Access Project alongside Leah Padilla.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
And we would also like to welcome our guest today, Kevin Schaefer from Supporting Inclusive Practices. I will allow you to introduce yourself, Kevin.
Awesome. So great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Kevin Schaefer, Director of the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project out of El Dorado County Office of Education.
Thank you for being here, Kevin. We're going to pass it to Leah to take care of a couple business items, and then we're going to send it off to you.
Great.
All right. So at Open Access, we are committed to follow the principles of universal design for learning. So our accessibility promise, we have done a few things. You can see that we do simple backgrounds with high contrast text. We also have the QR code so you can access the slides. And there is the tiny URL. We also have alternative text if you need to use a screen reader. And then this is a small group. So if you have questions, please unmute, put things in chat, and we'd love to hear from you. And then just a little bit about Open Access. We are a statewide special education resource lead. And we are all about accessibility. So we believe that when all students have access to quality curriculum and instruction, then we can see them actively participate, engage, and learn in inclusive settings. So we say open access is where UDL, assistive technology, and augmentative alternative communication collide. And now I'll pass it over to you, Kevin, to talk about your project.
Of course. Thank you, Leah and Lori. Again, I appreciate the invitation to talk about all things inclusion. And we are a small crowd, so I hope we're also a lively crowd. Otherwise, it's going to go pretty quick. So I just want to start by apologizing. I have a bit of a cold, so if I have a coughing fit, I'll put myself on mute. And if I sound like a 13-year-old boy trying to find his male voice, then you'll know why. So as I said, I'm the director of inclusive practices for the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. It's a project that has been in existence now for about 10 years. It started out of Riverside County with Kristen Brooks, and then it's now grown to about 15 program assistants, program specialists, coordinators, directors all over California. We represent San Diego, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Humboldt, Sacramento, and soon to go into the Tehama region as well as Central California. So we are trying as much as possible to reach all regions in California to continue working with districts, county offices, and SELPAs to increase inclusive opportunities for students with disabilities. You can see our mission and vision on the screen, and our vision is for every student to be educated in an environment that is intentionally designed, equitable, and inclusive. And the reason that I wanted to start with our vision statement is one of the areas that create the biggest barrier is that the environments that we assume are inclusive often aren't intentionally designed to support students with disabilities. And in those cases, that's when we have to work with our districts to kind of backtrack a little bit because the outcome of not intentionally designing the equitable and inclusive environments is that it actually causes harm not only to the students, but also to the teachers in the classroom. Um, who then have an experience that inclusion doesn't work, and that spreads across the culture of an organization. So that's the reason that we work with leadership teams at all levels of the educational system to create that vision and communicate that vision throughout the entire organization with this idea of alignment and accountability so that everyone is working toward that same goal of equitable outcomes for all students. After each slide, I'm going to pause because I would love for there to be kind of a back and forth Q&A. So I'll give a bit of a pause and ask if there's any comments or questions from slide number 1. I'm going to take that as a no. And we also get asked often, like, how does your project deliver support across the 100 LEAs that we work with, as well as LEAs that aren't officially part of the grant? So we implement our work through a tiered system. Um, the first tier is no cost professional development, events, resources, podcasts. We house the Special Edge newsletter. We get calls and emails all the time through our website, just asking for thought partnering. And one of the questions that we get asked most often is how do we do inclusion? Like, just tell us the thing. What's the magic sauce on creating inclusive environments? And our response always has to be, we don't know. We don't know because we don't yet know the context of your organization. We don't know your priorities. We don't know your population of students, of families. And that's really where this work begins, is to understand who it is that we are designing inclusive environments for and what our current context is in order to start that building process. So there is no one right way to do inclusion. It's going to depend on your current situation and then moving forward from there. So tier 1, we get asked those questions all the time. We email, we call, we visit, just to support as many LEAs across California as we possibly can. So you can access any of our resources off of our website, www.sipinclusion.org, or our social media on Instagram, Facebook, X, and you can also access our YouTube channel. Tier 2 is the grantees that are officially part of our project. This is the 100 SELPAs, county offices, and districts that we work with officially. And excuse me, they receive personalized support. It could be professional development, leadership team meetings, strategic planning. And we work with these districts over the course of anywhere from 5 to 7 years. And they also receive grant funding from the California Department of Education, anywhere from 18 to $60,000 to implement inclusive practices, depending on the state of the budget in any given year. These are the districts that we track over the course of those years, and that we are required by CDE to focus on special education indicators 3, 5, 6, and 7, which are the least restrictive environment indicator for school age and preschool, and then achievement for both school age and preschool. So we work with districts from preschool all the way through adult transition programs, as well as higher education, as inclusive programs are being created in our universities and colleges across California. And then tier 3, these are the LEAs that by request of CDE have been working on their meeting their indicator targets over a long period of time, and are kind of experience intensive level of need. And they join our project through the compliance and improvement monitoring process. We also have a one-pager that you can learn more about our project, and you can click the link, the QR code, or you can visit our website under what we do, and you can access it there too. So I'll pause. That was a lot of information about the project. Are there any questions about entering the project? How to get in, ways to get in, accessing support? Happy to answer any questions. Are we usually this quiet of a group, Lori and Leah? Or is it just me?
No, it's usually pretty
It's nice.
quiet.
I think we're just absorbing all the information, so we're good.
Okay.
I was
I
gonna
didn't want to miss
say,
the mark on anything.
if you aren't following SIP on social media, I would highly recommend everyone do that, because they have tons of great resources that they share. And maybe you're going to talk about it in a little bit, but we've also been encouraging everyone to sign up for your conference that's coming up in May.
Yeah, the last slide has the information, and then also if you go to our website, it's the first pop-up that you'll see. It's our 4th annual virtual inclusion conference. This year, one of our keynotes is Dr. Eric Carter, who's worked with the Tyus Center, and I think he's probably the king of all things inclusion across the country. But just he does amazing work, so we're super excited that he agreed to be our keynote this year. So a couple areas that we have focused on this year. The first is the Inclusion Academy model. We've received a lot of questions from LEAs who aren't officially part of the project, and they're like, "Well, how can we access your support at a bit of a deeper level?" So we came up with this idea of creating Inclusion Academies, and the purpose of the Inclusion Academy isn't only to reach LEAs with our project, but it's also to bring together county offices and SELPAs to increase their collective ability or capacity to work with their districts for students with disabilities around inclusion or least restrictive environment. So I think this year we have done, or in the process of doing, 10 inclusion academies where a county office and a SELPA come together, and we work with them to determine leadership teams in LEAs in their county to come together over the course of 3 sessions. And you can see in the first graphic down below, the 3 sessions follow what's called the Index for Inclusion, which is a framework that we have based our project on. It's an implementation process. And like I said, we bring together shared leadership teams at a district level. And over the course of those 3 sessions, the first being culture, focusing on the inclusive culture and the mindset around disability, ableism, and what it means to be an ally in our system to ensure our mindset around disability, the stereotypes and the stigma aren't the primary barrier for students experience meaningful, inclusive environments. So that first day is all about culture. What does it mean to have an inclusive culture throughout your entire organization? Then we come back a month, month and a half, depending on the schedule, and we work on inclusive policy and data. And that's where we go deeply into the local data. We go into the state data. We do data drill downs. We talk about empathy interviews. And this is a session that we partner closely with the System Improvement Leads project. And we co-facilitate session two because it's in their wheelhouse to look at root cause, to look at the policies and the practices that are in place to develop a cohesive implementation plan. In session three, we go into practice, and the practice is the last session because we want to put everything in place and intentionally design inclusive practices or inclusive organization so that by the time we determine the practices that directly relate to the planning that we've already done, we've created that through line among all of those different sessions: culture, policy, and practice. The actual framework within each section, we wanted the participants to leave with a plan of action. So one of the organizations that we've been working with over the past few years is it's called Culture Partners, and they work very closely with organizations on ways to build positive, inclusive cultures. So the results pyramid that you see in the second graphic is the process through which we take those leadership teams and we focus on the results. So what does the data show us? This is where we go into that really, really deep dive into where are we currently with our data? What does the data show? And then we ask the teams to look at that data and then determine what your desired results are. So that creates a vision through a lens of data on where we want to go. And then that maintains throughout all three of those sessions. We skip over that next section, which is actions. We don't come to that until our very last session, which is practices, because the trap that districts fall into, it's called the action trap. And if you look at your LCAPs and you look at your strategic plans, you look at your SIM plans, there's a lot of things listed. They're activities. And those activities, if not coherently aligned, they create initiative overload and confusion within the system. It's a lack of alignment. So we skip over the actions piece and we move right into the beliefs. And this is that first section of culture where we're talking about the beliefs in our system that could potentially negatively influence the actions that create a barrier for us to reach our desired results. So the beliefs around disability, we go really deep and hard on social justice, on identifying ableism, which could be ableist language, ableist behaviors, ableist decisions, and ableist programs that, with the best of intentions, create harm for students in their impact through post-secondary, by limiting post-secondary opportunities. So that beliefs section is critical to the work that we do. That's foundational. And then we go into the experiences and what experiences do our staff have currently that influence their belief system. So an example of that, if we don't have a process of communication when a student with a disability enters a site or a classroom, and there's no heads up for a teacher, and the student shows up and the teacher is left to his or her own devices to figure out, what am I doing with this student? How can I meet the needs of this student? That experience will create a belief in that teacher that inclusion doesn't work. So our experiences influences our belief that then dictates our actions. So when that teacher then is in an IEP meeting, they're going to bring those beliefs into the IEP meeting that inclusion or least restrictive environment in a general ed setting doesn't work. That action will then not allow us to reach the desired result of increasing inclusive opportunities for students with disabilities. We don't focus enough, if at all, on the culture aspect of implementation of the activities that are in the many plans that we're hoping to implement. So I'm gonna stop there. We're in year one. Um, so any questions about the Inclusion Academy? And we've just designed it as moving beyond LRE through the empowerment of every student's rightful presence. Any comments in the chat? Anybody want to unmute? Anybody want to have a conversation? And just really quickly, Leah and Lori, um, our prototype for the Inclusion Academy was Santa Barbara, their inclusion network. And this is where it was actually born. So they did their first Inclusion Academy last year. They brought in 11 district teams. We went through inclusive culture, inclusive policy data, inclusive practices. And then at the end, when we got to inclusive practices, we brought in system of support TA providers. And all of the LEA teams got to go to those presentations and then decide what TA providers at no cost would you like to work with based on what you've created in your Inclusion Academy plan. And then what rose to the surface was Universal Design for Learning. So who else am I going to contact but Leah and Laurie from Open Access? So then that brought us together to design year two. And that focus then is on universal design for learning. And the interesting conversations that came out of that was the county and the SELPA were now aligned with what they now understood the LEAs wanted and needed from the LEAs, as opposed to making the assumption of universal design for learning is the next best thing. We're just going to implement that. But now your LEAs have alignment and they have a voice in what's being presented to them. And I mean, that just increases their buy-in and their interest and their level of implementation ongoing. So I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to share, Lori or Leah, about because you just did session two of the three. So we did another three this year. So what do you think?
I want to say that the alignment of the two projects is like mind blowing, right? Like how we can, what do we say that SIP brings the heart and the why to inclusion, and then open access follows up with the what and the how of inclusion. And so it really defined and aligned at the same time. I love being down in Santa Barbara supporting all the, I think we're up to 16 districts now. I feel like that's
Yeah,
cool.
it's grown.
It's grown. And so it's exciting to be a part of it and to watch it grow.
Yeah. Well, and the other piece to this now, we talked a little bit about alignment. Alignment within a school district, alignment at a site. Now we've created alignment and support from a statewide TA project coordination to a county office to a SELPA to multiple LEAs working on a similar implementation practice. They've now also created a network among each other. So now they're creating their own little inclusive UDL implementation network that has become even more powerful. So it's had farther and wider reach than even we expected. So, and we're collecting data on the feedback and the plans, and we will share that out in our final report. And if you do one more click, the other question that we get asked, and this is also our first year in implementing demonstration sites. The one question that we get asked all the time is we want to see inclusion. We want to connect with other organizations that are also on this inclusion path with a focus on students with disabilities. And because we've heard that over the past many number of years, we decided to create a process called demonstration site visits. And these are formal visits. This first year, we're keeping it within our grantees, but we're planning to open it up next year. We visited Washington State. They have a statewide demonstration site process that we built our demonstration site process on. And what we've done is worked with, I think we're at 9 demonstration sites, and these are LEAs that have worked with us for a long period of time. They moved out of the project as a grantee and moved into being funded as demonstration sites where they're hosting, they're providing resources, they're utilizing their staff to share their story. And to make the connections with other organizations that maybe just wanting the Q&A back and forth. And that's been a really powerful component to our work, is to create that network of like implementation areas of focus, because it can be really lonely work. And even though this is very individualized work, to have another district to say, you know what, we're a high school and we're looking at co-teaching. Is there any other high schools in the state that are also doing co-teaching that may not have perfected it, but we would just love to be able to visit their school, understand their process. What barriers did you find? What mistakes did you make? And I think that's where the power in this work happens, is the connection between those that are doing the work. We've also found that inclusion means many things. That it could be we are looking at understanding ableism, to we want to look at co-teaching. What about universal design for learning? We want to have fewer self-contained classrooms. How do we do that in a purposeful way? So because it's such a huge topic. That's why we have to ask the questions, and that's why we have to make these very specific connections between district to district. So any questions about demonstration sites? The feedback has been incredible.
So Kevin, you said for people not part of the grant right now, they would be able to maybe visit next year. Is that?
Yeah, I think we're going to be opening it up pretty soon. We're
Okay.
going to be increasing the number of demonstration sites. So we've been really working at cultivating the options. We have, if you can see the California map
Mhm.
below, you can see a lot of little pins in Southern California. We're looking at moving up the state because there's amazing work being done all over California. So, and we're really trying to create a spectrum of demonstration sites where we might have preschool. Marysville, which is I think is probably the most north, Marysville Joint. They brought all of their preschool students back to the district from their county programs. So we worked with them over the course of 2 years before they actually did the bring back. So a lot of our sites, they're like, we want to see preschool.
Mhm.
We want to start at preschool, and then we want to build through the grade levels. So they visit Marysville Joint, and they ask the questions. They spend the day and visit classrooms and talk to teachers and meet students, and it's quite the day. Our project staff is actually clamoring to be part of every single one of the demonstration sites just to get on campuses and in classrooms. So, any questions about Inclusion Academy or demonstration sites?
There was a comment in the chat that they would love to come to the Santa Barbara day 3 session. So I dropped it in the chat, April 14th. If you could join us, I don't know if that's possible or not, but we'll be there.
We will make room.
Yes. It is a full house, but we will always welcome visitors.
Yeah. That's the other positive sign about the Inclusion Academies. I did YOLO County Office yesterday, session 2. Session 1, I think there were 50 attendees from 8 different sites. And then this session, we had the same number of LEAs, but we had 75 people attend. So they go to session 1, they love it. They go back to their site and they're like, these are all the people who are missing. You need to attend session 2 and 3. So it's a good problem to have. Not enough space. Is there something in the chat?
Yes, they had comment about we need the fishbowl view to watch the whole process. So.
Yeah. Yes, Jen, we sure do. And that comment is so relevant because inclusion is nebulous. It's hard to understand. It's abstract. So I think that with demonstration sites, they're like, oh, this is what it
is.
looks like.
Yeah.
It doesn't look that different other than noticing you've got students with disabilities who are part of the overarching community as opposed to being invisible and segregated and excluded. People leave like, oh, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. We get the same thing with Universal Design for Learning. And so that's the goal of our showcase sites is like, oh, that's what it looks like in action. I'm actually doing some of that. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and part of the culture piece is helping the district teams recognize what they're already doing really well. Because it can get overwhelming.
Yeah.
We suck. And nobody does. Like look at all these things that you're doing. Now, what's the plus one? What's the plus one?
We do that all the time with districts. +1 approach. So
yeah,
training just yesterday and we did that. So yeah.
Well, and I'm not going to get through the slides at this rate. The other piece to this is there's an assumption that inclusion is synonymous with moving students from one place to another from the get-go. Like we have to get those students moved into a less restrictive environment. And when districts do that, when it's not intentionally designed, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. You might be meeting your compliance indicator for least restrictive environment, but you are absolutely not doing a service to students with disabilities by not looking at your organization honestly and figuring out what are those first next steps, what's the low-hanging fruit, and how can we start that implementation project, that process, which is why we've created the Blueprint for Inclusion. About 6 years ago, our leadership team went through continuous improvement science, all the things. And because there are so many different frameworks around implementation, we wanted to come up with an implementation process that is familiar yet not specific. So if a district is using improvement science, they can also see improvement science in our implementation process. So the process when we start working with a grantee is working with that leadership team on what is your vision? Who is sitting at the table? Who's not sitting at the table? And what we find out, if we don't say these are the people that need to be there, we will have special education representation at the table exclusively because people have a mindset that inclusion is special education. So let's bring our special ed director, let's bring our special education teachers, and we're going to do a plan that's going to directly influence general education. So that leadership team that's committed and understands their role through a lens of inclusion is critical in this first envisioning step. So we have to ask ourselves, what about HR? What is the role of our HR department in creating an inclusive environment? What does our evaluation system look like? Our mentoring system, our walkthroughs? What does our hiring process look like? What does our recruitment process look like? Are we recruiting individuals with an inclusion mindset to be part of our organization, to continue and sustain? And then we work with them on building, implementing, scaling, and then how do we sustain, regardless of who's in those roles. What we're currently piloting is a self-assessment for inclusion, which is based on the 5 domains of our blueprint for inclusion. So we just piloted with Santa Barbara, one of their districts, Orcutt, that's a grantee. We took their leadership team through their self-assessment, and what they realized was, yeah, they do have some work to do, but they're doing really good work in more than one of those domains. So we think, oh, we're in the envisioning stage. You're actually not only in the envisioning stage, you're doing things in your vision, positive, but you're also doing things in the building domain. You're also doing things in the implementing, scaling up, and sustaining domain. And when we broke that down for them, they were like, oh, we see where the gaps are. And then we also see what we're doing really, really well, which narrowed the focus organizationally at a leadership team level to say, this is our next step. This is where we want to go, and this is how we're going to do it. Was there something in the chat? I saw something come up. Are we good?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Good. I forget what the next slide is. And you can find the blueprint and our logic model on our website. So this is one of my favorite slides to talk about. So we've learned a few things over the last 10 years. So these bullet points just click in one at a time. So vision, remember the blueprint? We start with a clarity of envisioning. How are we defining inclusion? And because inclusion is utilized and used in so many different contexts, in so many different ways, and defined so differently, it's really lost its meaning. Where we say inclusion and we're like, I don't know exactly what that means. So if we look at inclusion across a context, are we asking students to earn their way into a general education setting by masking their disability and the way that it manifests? So are students spending more time masking their disability in order to be in that environment to earn their way in? Or are we considering inclusion to be just that place? We're gonna move students into a place and call it inclusion. Or do we really mean rightful presence, that we understand that those environments need to be designed for students, reflective of students and their needs? Rightful presence is the social justice component of inclusion, where we recognize the power differential in our educational system. And the term that they use in rightful presence is the guest host power dynamic, in that we have adults in the system who function as the hosts, who have the power to invite or uninvite students into settings that should be designed for them. The students are the guests that have to be invited in, or if they don't perform, if they don't fit within the box that's created, they're uninvited into a setting where they become invisibles. We've also learned that it has to be a system-wide approach. It requires the commitment across all departments, sites, classrooms, families, and community. And they can't buy in without an understanding of what is our vision and why are we doing this? Why is this good? Because it's hard work. Um, so that piece is critical, as well as this idea that disability and inclusion work cannot remain or be maintained in special education or on the shoulders of teachers and students. So I looked to Lori and Leah, and when we think of UDL, if we only implement UDL in the classroom with an expectation that only teachers will be implementing in isolation, we are not going to get the results and the calibrated implementation across all classrooms. It has to be at that district level where we have alignment and we have accountability and we have a communication plan for why we are doing this and why it's important to do it at a high level of fidelity. But we put it on the shoulders of teachers and students, and it remains in special education. It never takes hold because we're trying to create general education inclusive environments. So we can't exclude them.
I think that's a big piece with the Inclusion Academies, like having that shared vision,
Yeah.
that it's districts, it's the whole county. It's very powerful.
Well, and the people that attend, we had one Inclusion Academy where there was a librarian, and she was like, I don't know why I'm here. She didn't get the connection. And as we went through, we talk about Judy Human and who she is and how that's representation for students with disabilities to have a hero. And she was like, I don't have a single book written by a disabled author on my list. I don't have any books that portray disability from an asset-based perspective. And if we don't have representation, positive representation of students with disabilities or individuals with disabilities, how can students with disabilities see their disability as a positive identity? Their first step to inclusion, we are going to start figuring out how to get books and materials that are representative of students with disabilities. And we're going to talk about disability because we don't talk about disability because we think it's a bad thing or a hurtful thing or it's going to hurt the student. Well, it's going to hurt the student because we see it through a deficit lens. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it from a positive lens, and we're going to work with our parents to honor the disability identity of our students, our children, our youth. Uh, Next bullet point is recognizing and interrupting ableism is a key to creating meaningful, inclusive environments. Another question we get asked all the time. We have a slide. I think I put it in the slide deck. Uh, defining ableism, and I can't tell you the number of hands that go up and they're like, "What is it?" We don't know what ableism is. So we go into like hours long discussions of this is what ableism is, and this is why it has to be part of your equity work, not through special education, but part of the overarching equity work that you do. And if you can't recognize it or you don't know what it is, how are you going to function as an ally? How can you have empathy when you don't understand a differing identity? So I think that becomes one of the deepest conversations that we have throughout the whole Inclusion Academy and what is ableism. Um, Creating meaningful, inclusive environments, it has to be proactive, like we talked about. It's based in social justice and requires the whole system. And the piece that also blows people away is we don't ask students and families with disabilities, what is your experience with the innovations that we have put in place to center disability? Do we do empathy interviews? Do we have surveys? Do we have honest conversations in our IEP meetings? Um, the voice of the disability community is critical to doing this work. And I don't mean special education. Special education is programs and compliance. The disability equity piece has to be part of all of the work that we do in the design process. And it has to be intentional, and it can't be through a lens of assumptions. Because we're the experts in special education, because we're experts in education, does not mean that we are experts in understanding the needs and the experiences of the disability community. They are very different. And then I think there's one more bullet. Include, so we also assume that through the IEP process, when we determine least restrictive environment, which may be, general education, that when we determine students have access to typically developing peers at 80% or more, that they're also experiencing meaningful inclusion. And we have to separate this idea of inclusion being synonymous with least restrictive environment, because it is possible that students are in general education environments considered least restrictive through the IEP process and not experience meaningful inclusion. Students can also be in self-contained environments, more segregated environments, and they can experience belonging in that environment. The problem is that environment is artificial. That self-contained classroom is always with other students with disabilities. If we're truly preparing our students with disabilities to be independent post-secondary, then they also have to experience authentic learning environments where they have to learn through the dignity of risk what it means to fail, what it means to be rejected, how you deal with those natural, authentic situations prepares us to be successful in a work or a college trade school environment. So we have to ask ourselves, are we actually handicapping our students by the decisions that we make with the most positive intent? But because we don't understand or recognizing the ableist thinking in that decision making, are we causing harm? I think that's that whole slide. There's a lot of information on that slide. So we have to ask, and I would love in the chat, what is inclusion? How do you define inclusion? What is your personal definition? Because we see it in district mission and vision statements all the time. We are an inclusive organization, but nobody knows what it means. Or how will you know when you see it? How will you know when you achieve it? S- What did, yeah,
We have
Jennifer.
one in the chat, and it was previous to this, but I think it still fits. Like, we don't just want kids
Yeah.
visiting. Like,
Yeah. Well, and that's the other conversation that we have. This brings up so many not only emotions, but also a lot of connections for people. Um, this idea of visiting, that's what we used to call mainstreaming. Like we're going to mainstream a student into a general ed classroom. Well, they're actually just visiting. That's not inclusion. They're not making connections. They're not developing relationships. Um, and then they leave. And then they go back to their home base. And then that is the area that they experience the meaningful inclusion. So we've had to separate least restrictive environment from inclusion. We've had to separate mainstreaming from inclusion. We've had to separate special education from disability. When you start going through all of these finer points, people are like, okay, this is starting to make more sense, and it allows us to be more clear on exactly what we're doing and to recognize our assumptions that we've made in the past. Just because we didn't know,
mhm.
and we can't fault people for not knowing. So, so that's question number one. And this is our definition of a project, our project of inclusion. We thought if we're an inclusion project, we should probably define it. It's the active pursuit of human dignity by challenging and mitigating exclusionary practices. Plain, simple, related to UDL 3.0. So, so coming up with your definition and your vision, That's the place to start. And we can't be allies if we don't recognize the ableism in our system. So this is our definition of allies. And it's been interesting over the past month and a half. Um, just the first few words, person of privilege, we've had a lot of pushback talking about privilege, power, and marginality around identity and intersectionality. We've noticed, a lot of not going to talk about it, not going to go there, but we do have to recognize our identity of privilege, which is living in a world that's built for non-disabled individuals. There's a level of privilege there that disabled individuals do not experience. There's a differential. And that's where the social justice aspect comes in when we open up space for the voice and the experiences of the disability community to tell us what their needs are for us to design. And that's a critical piece to this process, developing what allyship is. And part of that is calling out ableist language when we recognize it. And that takes constant study because it's changing all the time. One of our attendees brought up this, like, the light went on for her, and she was like, it's really interesting that we will only explicitly segregate one identity that we're okay with, and that's disability. And she said, once a student qualifies for an IEP, for special education services, she was like, they become known as a special ed kid. They become known through that singular identity of deficit. That's the narrative that we have to switch. So that's allyship. Going deep into that is also part of the inclusion academy. And then that goes right along with ableism. This is what ableism is. It's the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on our belief that typical abilities are superior and deserve more. Yeah, Jennifer, all kids are our kids. That's part of the language. And as a former special education teacher, I would hear all the time, I'd get that phone call, come pick up your kid. I'm like, okay. And then someone at another academy said, there's the realization that I just had is that there's no such thing as a special ed kid. There's general education students who receive special education services. And if we truly believe that special education isn't a place, it's a sports and services, then we start making decisions based on that vision, that reality. So that's ableism. Um, and then should I end after this slide? This gives enough.
Yeah, you've got about 7 minutes,
Oh, okay. Well, I'm
six or
gonna
seven
go.
minutes.
I'm gonna go for another couple. Um, the the idea of creating meaningful, inclusive environments beyond least restrictive environment. We have to ask, is least restrictive environment enough? So I think about being in hundreds and hundreds of IEP meetings, and we're determining least restrictive environment as that place where those supports and services are going to be provided. But did we ever really think about whether or not that place is intentionally designed to ensure representation and connection, belonging, relationship for that student, from the teacher to the other students in that classroom? And then what is needed in order to make that happen? We work with middle school teachers, and we've heard time and time again, but middle schoolers, oh my God, they don't want to be associated with someone who's different at that age. I'm like, but if we start inclusion and creating those relationships and allies and feelings of empathy in preschool, disability is then normalized. By the time they get to middle school, guess what? They're just part of our class, which takes a long time, but we have to do it with urgency. What's the next slide? And I'll decide whether or not we're going to go on. Oh, just click one more time. That's a great place to stop. Compliance and belonging. So compliance is your least restrictive environment. That is your journey. Belonging and inclusive education, that's your destination. So we're trying to combine, like, yes, least restrictive environment. That's important. We're going for that 80% or more. But it's not going to be beneficial if we also don't consider belonging, relationship, and community within that least restrictive environment where supports and services are delivered. And I will end it there. Oh, Judy Human. That's Judy
There were
Human.
just one or two slides that we weren't able to get to, but
That's
you did
okay.
such a fabulous job.
Oh, and there's the conference. Go to our website, register. It's worldwide now. We have about 2,000 registrants every year, and gets bigger and bigger.
Did you just say worldwide?
It is worldwide. We
Why?
have Ireland, we have Singapore. Where else? Somebody else. Egypt, I think, showed up last year. I don't know.
It's awesome.
It's kind of fun. Yeah, I think that was the last one.
And then also to thank you, Kevin, so much for sharing all of your information. There's
Pleasure.
lots of thanks in the chat and new learning, so we appreciate that. In March, for our next Connect and Access, we'll have system improvement leads coming and sharing about their project. So we so appreciate everyone coming, and thank you so much, Kevin.